My family humiliated me for being a welder for years, but when I inherited 70 acres and $150,000 from my great uncle, my brother forged a will. They tried to steal my cabin, and now they have criminal records. I'm 24 years old. I work as a welder, and I'm also a part-time hunting guide. And what happened a few months ago, with my great uncle's inheritance, basically blew up what was left of my relationship with my family. I guess I should start by explaining that I've always been like the black sheep of my family, the one who didn't fit in with everyone else. My father, Anthony, is a successful lawyer. My mother, Brenda, was a registered nurse, but she retired years ago, and now basically her full-time job is worrying about what other people think of the family. My siblings are, let's say, the definition of ambitious. Colton has a chain of gyms, like one of those fancy places where the membership costs about what I make in a week. Wesley has his own tech startup, and he's always talking about funding rounds and things that, honestly, I don't understand or care about. And my sister Kimberly married Aaron, a corporate lawyer with a last name that sounds like it comes with stock options included. And then there was me, the guy who decided to be a welder instead of going to college. The truth is, I love my job. I like working with my hands. I like being in the shop or outside guiding hunting groups. But for my family, that basically made me a failure. Family dinners were torture, seriously, because there were always those passive-aggressive comments, Colton asking when I was going to get a real job, or my mother sighing and saying it still wasn't too late to enroll in college, as if I was 18 and not 24. Wesley was the worst. He always made these comments about how working-class people didn't understand the complexities of the modern world or something like that, super condescending. And Kimberly basically pretended I didn't exist. Unless she needed to feel superior to someone, the only person in my entire family who never made me feel like a disappointment was my great-uncle Oliver. Oliver was my father's grandfather's brother. The family is big and complicated, but basically he was an older man who lived in a cabin in the middle of 70 acres of forest about 3 hours from the city. Oliver had been a lawyer when he was young, just like my father, but at some point in his life he decided that all that wasn't for him and moved to the country. He bought this property in the 70s, built a cabin with his own hands, and basically lived the rest of his life fishing, hunting, and doing whatever he wanted. My family thought he was crazy, obviously, because how could someone who could be making good money in the city decide to go live like a hermit in the woods? But I always thought Oliver was the sanest one of all of us. I started visiting him when I was about 16. My father had taken me once when I was a kid, but after that we almost never went because, according to my mother, the place was too rustic and there was no good cell signal. But when I turned 16 and got my first used car, one day I decided to drive there on my Oliver was surprised to see me, but he welcomed me with open arms, gave me a beer. Technically, I was underage, but he wasn't one to follow those rules to the letter. And we spent the weekend fishing and talking about life. From that day on, I started visiting him regularly, like every month or 2 months, and we became very close. He never judged me for not wanting to go to college. In fact, he encouraged me to follow my instinct and do what made me happy. He taught me how to track deer, how to identify edible plants, a bunch of things that in the city you never learn but that are incredibly useful. Last year, in March I think it was, or maybe early April, Oliver called me and told me he needed to talk to me. His voice sounded weird, like more serious than normal, and I knew something was wrong. I drove to his cabin that same weekend, and that's when he told me he'd been diagnosed with cancer. Advanced stage lung cancer. He smoked for like 40 years, so I guess it wasn't surprising, but it still hit me hard. I asked him what they were going to do, if there was treatment, and he basically told me that at 82 years old he had no interest in going through chemotherapy just to gain a few more months. He said he'd rather live his last months in peace, in his cabin, doing the things he loved. He asked me to let the family know, which I did, and this is where things get interesting. You know what my family's reaction was? Basically nothing. My father said something like, "Oh, what a shame. Send him my condolences." But he never visited. My mother was more worried about how to organize a possible funeral than about going to see him while he was still alive. Colton literally said he was too busy with the opening of a new gym to make a 3-hour trip. Wesley didn't even respond to my message until 2 days later with a text that said, "Sorry to hear that," and Kimberly asked if Oliver had any kind of life insurance or assets that we could help manage. Seriously, that was her first concern. Not whether her great uncle was suffering or needed something, but what was going to happen to his property when he died. So, basically, I became Oliver's primary caregiver. I started visiting him every weekend, then every 3 or 4 days when his condition worsened. I had to cut back my work hours, which meant less money, but I didn't care. Oliver was real family, not that family that only shows up when they need something or when there's a perfect photo to post on social media. I helped him with day-to-day tasks, cooked, cleaned. We sat on the porch and talked for hours about his life, his experiences, his regrets. He had so many incredible stories, like he'd traveled all over the world when he was young, he'd worked on legal cases that appeared in national newspapers, but what he liked to remember most were the simple days in his cabin, mornings fishing at the lake, nights by the fire. About 2 months after the diagnosis, Oliver told me he'd called his lawyer, Mr. Hughes, to update his will. He didn't give me many details at the time, he just said he wanted to make sure things were in order. I didn't think much of it, honestly, because I wasn't there for his money or his property. I was there because I loved him, and because no one else in the family bothered to do it. But what I did start to notice, and this was weird, is that suddenly my family started calling more often asking about Oliver. My mother would call every week asking how he was, if he needed anything, saying that maybe they should organize a family visit. Colton asked me if the cabin was in good condition, if the land was valuable. Wesley, who literally hadn't responded to my message for weeks, suddenly wanted to know all the details about Oliver's health and how long the doctors gave him. The calls became more frequent as Oliver's health deteriorated. Kimberly called me once crying, saying she felt terrible for not having visited Oliver in years and that she wanted to see him last time. I told her she could come whenever she wanted, that Oliver would be happy to see her, but she always had some excuse, like Erin had to work the weekend or her kids had activities. But she kept calling me every 2 days asking about the cabin, if Oliver had mentioned his plans for the property, that kind of thing. It was obvious what was happening. I mean, everyone in my family suddenly remembered Oliver existed because they realized he had valuable property and probably some money saved up. About 5 weeks before Oliver died, my mother organized a family dinner supposedly to discuss how we could better support him in his final days. I went to that dinner, even though I already knew it was going to be a disaster, and I wasn't wrong. It basically turned into a discussion about what was going to happen to Oliver's property when he passed away. Colton suggested the family could turn the cabin into some kind of shared retirement home, like a place where we could all vacation. Wesley thought they should sell everything and divide the money equitably among the descendants. Kimberly wanted the property to stay in the family, but to be rented on Airbnb to generate passive income, because of course the first thing she thinks about is how to make money from someone's death. My father, who's supposedly the sensible one in the family, agreed with selling and dividing. I was sitting there listening to this whole conversation, and I felt like I was going to explode. At one point I told them, Oliver hasn't even died yet, and you're already dividing his things like vultures. None of you have visited him in months. None of you have bothered to call him directly to see how he is, and now you're here planning what to do with his property as if it were some kind of lottery you won. My mother told me I was being dramatic, and that the family was just trying to be practical. Colton said something like, "You don't understand how these things work because you don't have any kind of financial education," which, wow, thanks, brother. I got up and left that dinner, and honestly, I should have cut contact with all of them at that moment. The last weeks of Oliver's life were difficult. I'm not going to lie. The pain was getting worse, and he was weakening rapidly. I hired a nurse who came twice a day to help with medications and make sure he was comfortable, which I paid out of my own pocket because my family definitely didn't offer to help with that. I spent almost every night at the cabin, sleeping on the living room couch to be close in case he needed anything. His dog, an old golden retriever named Maisie, never left his side. And I made sure she was well fed and cared for too, because I knew how much Oliver loved her. Oliver died on a Tuesday morning. I was there. Maisie was lying next to him on the bed, and he simply fell asleep and stopped breathing. It was peaceful, I guess, which is the best you can hope for in those situations. I called hospice, and they came to do what was necessary. I called Mr. Hughes to inform him, and then, because I had to, I called my family. My mother arrived about 2 hours later with Kimberly. both crying dramatically, which I found ridiculous considering neither of them had come to see him when he was alive. My father arrived that night. Colton and Wesley arrived the next day for the funeral. The funeral was small, basically just close family and some old friends of Oliver's from the nearby town. My siblings and my sister were there acting like they were devastated, hugging and crying, and I could only think about how fake they were. After the funeral, Mr. Hughes informed us that there was going to be a will reading 2 days later at his office. My father assumed it would be something simple. Probably Oliver had left instructions to sell everything and divide the money among his great-nephews or something like that. The will reading was, without exaggeration, one of the most satisfying and, simultaneously, most horrible moments of my life. We were all sitting in Mr. Hughes's office, like my father, my mother, my siblings, my sister, Aaron, and me. Mr. Hughes opened the document and began to read. Basically, Oliver had left some specific personal items to his old friends in town. He'd left $50,000 to a local animal sanctuary, and then came the important part. The cabin, the 70 acres of land, and $200,000 in cash for renovations and maintenance, he left to me. Everything. Completely to me. The rest of his estate, which was like another $300,000 in savings and investment accounts, he left to various charities he cared about. You could have heard a pin drop in that office. My family was in complete silence for like 10 seconds, and then all hell broke loose. Colton was the first to speak, shouting that this was completely unfair, that Oliver had obviously been manipulated. Kimberly started crying, not from sadness, but from pure rage, saying I had taken advantage of a vulnerable old man. Wesley was checking his phone, probably looking for lawyers specializing in will disputes. My father, the lawyer, was asking Mr. Hughes about the validity of the will, if Oliver was in his right mind when he signed it, that kind of thing. My mother was looking at me with this expression of absolute betrayal, as if I had committed some kind of horrible crime. Mr. Hughes explained very calmly that Oliver had updated his will while completely sound of mind, that he had been very specific about his wishes, and that he had anticipated there might be family disputes, which is why he had included a clause saying that anyone who challenged the will in court would automatically lose any right to any part of his estate, even personal items. Basically, Oliver had thought of everything. I told everyone that I hadn't manipulated anyone, that Oliver had made his own decisions, and that maybe if they had been there for him during his last months, instead of just worrying about his property, things would have been different. Colton told me to go to hell, Kimberly said. I was a thief, and my father basically disowned me right there, said he was extremely disappointed in me and that I had destroyed the family out of greed, which is ironic coming from him. I left that office thinking the worst was over, but oh man, I was so wrong. For the next few weeks, my family wouldn't stop harassing me. My mother called me every day crying, saying it was her responsibility as a mother to make sure the inheritance was distributed fairly, that I should be ashamed of myself, that Oliver clearly hadn't been thinking clearly. Colton sent me like 50 text messages telling me that the right thing to do was share the inheritance with the family, that being selfish was only going to isolate me from everyone, that I was going to end up alone and miserable. Wesley sent me a detailed financial analysis showing how if we sold the property and divided the money, each of us could receive a decent amount, as if that was going to convince me. But what really made me angry was when I found out that my mother, Kimberly, and Aaron had driven to the cabin and tried to enter without my permission. I had installed security cameras on the property right after the will reading because, honestly, I didn't trust my family at all. The cameras caught all three of them trying to open the door, looking through the windows, and Aaron even tried to force the lock on the back door. I sent them the video and told them that if they set foot on the property again, without my explicit permission, I'd call the police. Kimberly replied, saying it was ridiculous, that it was family property and we all had a right to be there, completely ignoring the fact that legally and literally it was my property now. About 3 weeks after the will reading, Kimberly contacted me with an offer. She said she and Aaron were willing to buy the property from me for $100,000, which was absolutely ridiculous, considering just the land was worth like $400,000. According to the appraisals I'd done, I told her I wasn't interested in selling, period. She got angry and said I was being unreasonable. That $100,000 was more money than I'd probably see in my lifetime doing welding and hunting guide work, that I should be grateful someone was willing to get me out of that mess. I hung up on her and blocked her number. Then came Wesley with his plan, which honestly was the boldest of all. About a month after the will reading, Mr. Hughes contacted me saying that Wesley had submitted a document to the court claiming he'd found a more recent will from Oliver that left everything divided equally among all the great nephews. Mr. Hughes assured me this was obviously false because he'd been Oliver's only lawyer for decades and had been present when Oliver signed his final will. But I still had to hire my own lawyer to deal with this situation, which cost me like $5,000 that I really couldn't afford at the Creekbrit time. The investigation into Wesley's fake will was pretty quick. Basically, he'd tried to forge a document using a template he found on the internet. He'd forged Oliver's signature, and he'd gotten 2 friends of his to sign as supposed witnesses. The problem is, the witnesses didn't even live in the same state when they supposedly witnessed the signing, and Oliver's forged signature was so obviously fake that even a novice handwriting expert could have identified it in seconds. Mr. Hughes reported Wesley to the authorities, and basically, Wesley was charged with forgery and fraud. He had to hire his own lawyer, obviously, and eventually accepted a plea deal where he had to pay fines and do community service. He didn't go to prison, which is a shame, honestly, but at least he has a criminal record now. After the disaster with Wesley, my family finally started to calm down a bit, or at least they stopped harassing me so openly. My father sent me a message saying he was sorry about how things had developed, but that clearly I had made decisions that had destroyed any possibility of having a united family. My mother stopped calling me after I told her directly that I wasn't going to change my mind and that her behavior was only confirming that Oliver had made the right decision. Colton tried one last time to convince me to at least sell him part of the land to build a boutique gym, because of course he did, but I blocked him too. Kimberly was the last to give up. About 3 months after all the drama, she sent me a long message saying she'd been in therapy and that her therapist had helped her see that her behavior had been inappropriate, that she understood why Oliver had made the decision he made, and that she hoped we could eventually rebuild our relationship as siblings. I responded, telling her I appreciated the message, but honestly didn't see how we could have a relationship after everything that happened, that she'd shown her true colors, and I wasn't interested. In pretending everything was fine, she never responded to that message. Now, about 6 months after all this exploded, I basically have no contact with any member of my family. My father and I don't talk. My mother stopped trying to communicate after I ignored her last 5 messages. My siblings are completely out of my life, and Kimberly apparently told the entire extended family that I'm a manipulator who took advantage of a dying old man, so I don't have relationships with cousins, uncles, anyone either. Honestly, I don't care as much as I thought I would. I realized my family only wanted me around when they needed me for something or when they could feel superior to me, never because they really cared about who I am as a person. Oliver's cabin is completely mine now. I've been using the money he left me to make some necessary renovations, like I fixed the roof that had leaks, updated the water system, installed solar panels to have more reliable electricity. I'm thinking about eventually moving here full-time, maybe expanding my hunting guide business, living the simple life Oliver lived, and that always attracted me. Maisie, Oliver's dog, came with me, and she's happy here. She loves running around the property and swimming in the lake. Last week, I was sitting on the porch at sunset, exactly in the same spot where Oliver and I used to sit drinking coffee in the mornings, and I was thinking about everything that happened. I don't regret anything, honestly. Oliver left me this property because he knew I was the only one who really cared about him, the only one who was there when he needed it. Not because I wanted something from him, but because he was my real family. My legal family showed exactly who they are when they thought there was money at stake, and although it hurts to admit it, I'm probably better off without them. Sometimes the family you choose is more real than the family you're born with, I guess. And Oliver, even after death, gave me the gift of seeing clearly who deserves to be in my life and who doesn't. For that, and for this beautiful cabin in the middle of the woods, I'll always be grateful.